Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. For 20 years, thousands of people trusted one man with their life savings. Retirees, charities, celebrities, and some of the most sophisticated investors on Wall Street handed over billions of dollars, believing they were part of an exclusive and untouchable investment fund. The returns never wavered. Month after month, year after year, the statements arrived showing steady profit, even when the rest of the market collapsed. It seemed too good to be questioned. It was too good to be true. Behind the calm returns and the respected name was the largest fraud in financial history, and the man responsible had been hiding it in plain sight since before most of his clients were even born. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born in Queens, New York in 1938. His early life was unremarkable. His parents ran a small brokerage out of their home that was eventually shut down by regulators for failing to file required paperwork. It was a quiet warning sign
that no one, least of all young Bernie, seemed to notice. In 1960, at the age of 22, Madoff started his own firm with $5,000 he had saved from working as a lifeguard and installing sprinkler systems. He called it Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. At first, the business was legitimate. Madoff built a reputation as an innovator, one of the earliest brokers to embrace electronic trading at a time when most of Wall Street still relied on paper tickets and phone calls. His firm grew steadily through the 1970s and 1980s, and by the end of that decade, he was handling a significant share of all trading activity on the New York Stock Exchange. In 1990, Madoff was appointed chairman of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange, a position that cemented his status as one of the most respected figures in American finance. But quietly, behind the legitimate brokerage, Madoff was running something else. Investigators later traced the origins of the fraud back for decades, though the exact starting point remains debated. What is clear is that at some stage, Madoff began covering losses in his separate asset management business with fabricated numbers instead of real trades. Rather than admit the mistake, he chose to hide it. That single decision would grow into a scheme spanning 20 years and touching tens of thousands of lives. The mechanics were simple, almost old-fashioned for a man known as a pioneer of electronic trading. Madoff told clients he was using a strategy called split strike conversion, a legitimate but complex method involving stocks and options designed to generate modest, steady returns. In reality, none of the trades were happening. New investors' money was deposited directly into a single account at Chase Manhattan Bank. When existing clients requested withdrawals, they were paid using money from new investors. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, the same fundamental con used by Charles Ponzi nearly a century earlier, just dressed up in the language of modern finance and run by a man with impeccable credentials. What made Madoff's scheme so effective was exclusivity. Access to his fund was treated as a privilege, not a service. Prospective investors were sometimes turned away or made to wait, which only increased the desire to get in. Wealthy families, charitable foundations, Hollywood figures, and European banks all became clients, often introduced through trusted friends or feeder funds that funneled money to Madoff without fully disclosing where it was going. His returns were suspiciously consistent, usually between 10 and 12% a year, regardless of what the broader market was doing. In good years and bad, the statements looked the same: steady, reliable, almost boring. That consistency should have been the first red flag. In the world of real investing, markets fluctuate. Even the most skilled fund managers have losing months, losing years. Madoff's clients rarely saw a single one. For those inside the world of quantitative finance, the numbers simply did not add up. One of the earliest and most persistent skeptics was a financial analyst named Harry Markopolos. In the late 1990s, Markopolos was asked by his employer to try to replicate Madoff's trading strategy. After running the numbers, he concluded within minutes that it was mathematically impossible to achieve those returns using the methods Madoff claimed.
He compared it to a baseball player hitting nearly .970 for an entire season, a level of consistency that simply does not exist in real markets. Convinced he was looking at either a massive fraud or an illegal trading advantage, Markopolos began sending detailed reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission, warning them that Madoff was running what he called the world's largest unregistered hedge fund. His warnings were largely ignored. Between 1999 and 2008, the SEC received multiple credible tips about Madoff, some of them detailed enough to lay out exactly how the fraud worked. Investigators opened inquiries on several occasions. Each time, they failed to uncover the scheme. Part of the problem was structural. Junior staff lacked the financial expertise to fully understand Markopolos' analysis. Part of it was Madoff's own reputation. He was a former NASDAQ chairman, a respected industry figure with close ties to regulators and even friendships with SEC officials. It was hard for investigators to imagine that a man so embedded in the establishment could be running a fraud of this scale. Madoff himself later admitted that if regulators had simply checked his trades against records held by the depository trust company, the scheme would have unraveled in days. They never did. For years, the fraud continued to grow, feeding on its own success. As long as new money kept coming in, Madoff could keep paying out the returns he had promised. The scheme required constant expansion, a river of fresh capital to stay ahead of the withdrawals. Through the early 2000s, it worked. Feeder funds like Fairfield Greenwich Group funneled billions of client dollars into Madoff's operation, often without disclosing the full extent of the relationship. Investors in Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East pumped in more money still. By some estimates, at its peak, the fraud involved more than $60 billion in reported client value, though much of that figure represented fabricated profits that never actually existed. The scheme finally met its limit in 2008. As the global financial crisis deepened that autumn, panicked investors across the world rushed to pull their money out of nearly everything, including funds tied to Madoff. Redemption requests poured in faster than new investments could replace them. By December, Madoff was facing roughly $7 billion in withdrawal demands he had no way to meet. There was no reserve of hidden profits to draw from. There never had been. On December 10, 2008, Madoff confessed to his two sons, Mark and Andrew, both of whom worked at the firm. He told them the business was, in his words, one big lie, basically a giant Ponzi scheme. According to their attorney, the sons were stunned. They left their father's apartment and immediately contacted a lawyer who reported the confession to federal authorities. The following morning, December 11th, FBI agents arrived at Madoff's Manhattan apartment. When they asked if there was an innocent explanation for the discrepancies in his business, Madoff reportedly replied that there was no innocent explanation, that he had been running a massive Ponzi scheme. He was arrested that day. The scale of what investigators uncovered in the following weeks was almost impossible to comprehend. Federal prosecutors alleged that Madoff had defrauded investors of approximately $65 billion, a figure that included both real invested principal and decades of fabricated paper gains. A court-appointed trustee later determined the actual cash losses, meaning real money that clients had put in and never gotten back, totaled closer to $18 billion. Either way, it was the largest financial fraud ever uncovered, dwarfing anything before it. The human cost extended far beyond spreadsheets. Retirees who believed they had secure pensions discovered their savings were gone. Charitable foundations, some dedicated to medical research and Holocaust survivor support, lost their entire endowments overnight, forcing several to shut down completely. Individual investors who had trusted Madoff for decades, in some cases across multiple generations of the same family, were left with nothing. 9 victims spoke directly to the court in Madoff's sentencing, describing shattered lives, and in some cases, deaths they connected to the stress and despair caused by the fraud. As investigators dug deeper into Bernard L. Madoff
Investment Securities
it became clear that Madoff could not have run the operation entirely alone. A small, trusted inner circle helped maintain the illusion for years. Employees like bookkeeper Annette Bongiorno fabricated trading records using nothing more sophisticated than old newspaper stock listings, manually assigning fake trades and gains to client accounts after the fact. Investigators later found handwritten index cards used to track the falsified trades, tangible evidence of a fraud built not on complex algorithms, but on old-fashioned paperwork and blind trust. Several of Madoff's associates were eventually charged and convicted, including his brother, Peter, who served as the firm's chief compliance officer and was later sentenced to 10 years in prison. Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felony counts on March 12, 2009. In court, he offered a rare direct admission, describing years of maintaining fake statements and fictitious returns while knowing the entire operation was built on nothing. He insisted, as he had told the FBI at his arrest, that he alone was responsible, though investigators and prosecutors were skeptical that so vast an operation could have functioned without broader knowledge among his closest staff. On June 29, 2009, Judge Denny Chin sentenced Madoff to 150 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed under the charges, calling his crimes extraordinarily evil. Madoff was also ordered to forfeit an amount exceeding the total sum that had ever flowed through the scheme, a largely symbolic figure, given how little of it remained. The fallout reached into Madoff's own family. His son Mark took his own life in December 2010, exactly 2 years to the day after his father's arrest. His other son, Andrew, died of cancer in 2014. Madoff's wife, Ruth, who was never criminally charged, lost virtually everything associated with the family's former wealth and lived the rest of her years largely out of public view. Madoff spent his remaining years at a federal prison in Butner, North Carolina, working menial jobs for a few cents an hour. He died there on April 14, 2021, at the age of 82, roughly 12 years into his sentence. In the years since, a court-appointed trustee has worked methodically to recover money for Madoff's victims, tracking down assets scattered across banks, real estate holdings, and financial institutions worldwide. By 2024, more than $14 billion of the estimated $18 billion in actual losses had been recovered and returned, an unusually high recovery rate for a fraud of this size, though it came far too late to undo the damage for many who lost everything. What remains most unsettling about the Madoff case is not the complexity of the crime, but its simplicity. There was no advanced technology, no impenetrable disguise, no criminal mastermind operating in the shadows. There was only a trusted name, a steady stream of numbers on a page, and a willingness among investors and regulators alike to believe that some things are simply too respected to question. For 20 years, that trust was the only thing holding the entire scheme together. And for 20 years, it was enough.